Welcome back, guys. We're gonna have the second episode of the chat with Ben Carlson. We focused on the past experience he's had in Burundi in the first episode, so we're gonna move on to the present and the future. Talking about that, we cannot help but talking about COVID-19. How has it affected you and Long Miles Coffee project so far?
I think there's two ways that I really have to present this. And with COVID-19, the first thing is that the country of Burundi has no medical ability to deal with COVID-19. So there's no precautions, there's no ability to help people, there's no ventilators. If you are sick with COVID, you will die. So on top of that, the country didn't know how to stop the spread of COVID or what to do. So it really came to us as a team to present a way to protect our team of 50 plus staff, as well as the 5,000 families that we worked with. How do we protect them? So we put together a whole protocol for social distancing, wearing masks, washing your hands. And it was tough because in Burundi there's no running water up in the mountains. There's no soap, very little soap, access to soap. There's very little access to water. So, and lifestyle is very close together, very communal, very face to face and touching and grabbing hands. And it's so the idea of COVID spreading there is very real. So we were able to put together a whole protocol on how to protect our team, our families, and the farmers. And so that's been highly effective. So we've been able to do that, and we implemented that as early as March, knowing that it was coming. Even before Burundi acknowledged that there was any COVID, we were putting into place protocols to prevent the spread of COVID with our families. So that was one thing. But the other aspect of COVID was that Christy and I were supposed to be back in Burundi for harvest. And as we said in our last episode, that we went back to the United States to start to prepare for the future of Long Miles and put in place a managing director. But we were supposed to come back for harvest, and the flights to Africa were canceled because of COVID. All flights were stopped. So for this whole harvest season, we've been operating remotely and working with WhatsApp and Zoom and email. And the reality is that the team that's there, our managing director, Raphael, Seth, who's our quality control manager, have risen, Epaphras, the agronomists, have risen to the occasion. And I just have been getting in the first samples from this year. And I think this is our best quality harvest ever. Like we've never had coffee this good. So I think maybe I was the problem. so as soon as I got out of the way, what happened was our team rose up, and they're an amazing team, and they produced they've been doing this now for 8 years, and this team is a cohesive unit. And so this team of fermentation and drying teams and agronomists have produced a better quality coffee this year than we've ever tasted before, and we're just getting it off the tables now. So I hope some gets to Japan because it's a delight.
Can we ask you for samples if some of the listeners want that?
Oh, absolutely. We have, what's really fascinating is that for Japan, Japan as a country will not accept samples from Burundi itself. So we send all of our samples to the United States, and we have a quality control lab in the East Coast of the United States, and they assess water activity, water quality. They do an assessment of the quality of the cup and the density and everything of the quality, so that we can do micro lot assessment in the United States lab as well as the Burundi lab. And then from that US lab, we could send you samples in Japan, because I feel like it's just the quality of the cup. I mean, we do fully washed coffee, which is sparkling and bright. And this year in the cup, I would say it's more than ever. You're getting these floral notes, very jasmine-like, a little bit of herbal notes, and stone fruit. And then we do natural coffees. And so this they're vibrant and clean, nothing funky and strange about them. They're just crisp. Very much all those floral notes are just an explosion, and you're just getting this just cup of just fruit in your mouth. And then we have some very special anaerobic lots where we're doing some experimental lots where we are doing anaerobic fermentation, where we're keeping lots with one-way valved tanks for 36 hours to allow them to pre-ferment before pulping. And what we're finding is just the clarity of the cup and the fruit notes are just very special.
Wow. All the descriptions are so unique, and I really try that out as soon as possible. But we are talking more about, COVID-19. So how can it be very unique like that? Because you said your farm has 100% Bourbon.
Correct.
And is it kind of, related to restrictions the government imposed, right, in Burundi? Can you tell us a little bit more of that?
Yeah, for the past of Burundi was a Belgian colony, and after World War I, Belgium took over the colonization of Burundi from Germany, and then from the early 30s actually on, the Belgians mandated that every family in Burundi plant Bourbon coffee, and when Burundi became an independent nation in the 60s, the Burundi government just kind of kept the same mandates. You have to plant coffee, and it has to be Bourbon. And really, for no reason that makes any sense, there's been this mandate from the government that says you have to just plant Bourbon. So good or bad, we have 100% Bourbon coffee. But the result is in the cup, and I don't know how your listeners, what their level of palate is and whatnot, but when you drink 100% Bourbon coffee, you know it, especially when it's a Burundi coffee, because for long miles, all of our coffee grows from 1,800 to 2,100 meters above sea level. So this is very high elevation Bourbon coffee. So the flavors in the cup are very floral, very fruit forward. The acidity is really sweet. And I would say stone fruit and dark berries are the predominant flavor notes that we're getting year upon year. But the kind of the unique thing about Long Miles is that we learned a lot from winemakers around the world, and winemakers are really taking terroir into effect. What happens when you're on the west side of a hill versus the north side of a mountain? What happens when you're right on the edge of a rainforest? And so every single hill that we work on, and we work on 12 different hills. So every single hill we keep separate, and every single hill we keep every day lot separate. So when you drink a Long Miles coffee, you're drinking a unique lot to that hill to a specific day or 2 or 3 day period, so to capture the terroir, the flavor, the environment of that hill. And so what we've realized is we've been able to hone in, where the best coffee is in Burundi, and then we've been able to grow coffee there. And how do you grow it best? And then we've been able to maximize and try to really take Bourbon and try to highlight all of its good values.
Wow, that is so appealing. Great. So looking back to the coronavirus.
Yes.
So in the end, you got success. You made great success in this harvest. But how they made it successful like that? Like probably you had a lot of struggles, difficulties, problems, throughout Zoom, WhatsApp, in the harvest season. Like how did it possible? I'm so curious.
Well, I think it's been very hard, and I think the hard part about COVID is that the fact that most coffee roasters and cafes in the world are reducing their volumes, and they just, they're not open. And so I would say that as a whole, the specialty coffee industry is probably reducing its total roasting ability and consumption by a minimum of 40% across the world. And that's a very big deal, because coffee producing countries like Burundi still produce coffee. We still need to sell our coffee. And so, I've been talking to my friends in Honduras, in Colombia, in Brazil, and they're sitting with all this coffee and they don't know how to sell it, because cafes in Tokyo, cafes in Venice, cafes in LA and New York, they just can't sell coffee. So what are they going to do? They can't buy coffee. And I think what's happened with COVID is that it's created this really unique struggle in the coffee world, where we are still producing coffee at the same volume, but the world isn't buying coffee at specialty coffee shops at the same rate. And so there's this tension of, what do you do with this coffee? It still costs the same amount to produce, but now there's just not a buyer. And I think that in and of itself is the most drastic and major problem that we're not going to really see as a specialty coffee industry. That's really not going to hit us until next year, because by next year, you're going to see many farmers who have had to leave the mountain because they can't live. Because literally the only way to survive is to sell your coffee. And if you can't sell your coffee, you can't live. And so it's the same for Long Miles. This is our life. We're coffee farmers, we're coffee producers. And if we don't sell coffee, you don't live. So I think I think in a Western context, in the United States and in Tokyo and in Europe, you think of COVID and you think about, if I get sick or if I pass on this to my grandfather, what will happen? This is very serious. In Burundi and in many producing countries, dying of COVID is not the big issue. The big issue is, am I going to starve to death because I can't sell my coffee? So it's another whole world of problems that we don't think about from a Western context. We don't think about starvation. We don't think about, where am I going to get a meal? We don't think about, how am I going to actually survive in that context? We're thinking, I just don't want to get sick. So I think, it's a little bit of a hard reality, but that's the struggle with COVID that we're dealing with in Burundi. And so for us, it's for Long Miles, we are going to produce the same amount of coffee. All of the 5,000 families around us, we're producing all of their coffee, and we're not stopping. And it's up to us to make sure that we find a home for it and survive and get through to next harvest.
So for people who may not know the situation in Burundi, around 80% of GDP consists of coffee, right?
That's correct. Like between 70 and 80% of the GDP is from coffee.
Is it common for farmers to do kind of intercropping?
They often do, but now the reality is, with most farmers in Burundi, is that they may only have maybe 2 acres of land, like 1 hectare, 2 acres of land for their whole family. On that hectare or 2 acres, they have to grow coffee and everything they're going to eat for the year. So that might be, whatever they're not selling in coffee, they're just going to consume as a family.
So considering the decreasing demand that currently, would you recommend the farmers to produce quality coffee, like specialty coffee, doing more costs?
Now, that's a great question. And I think it's a very valid question. And I think what's actually even more poignant is the fact that Burundi farmers are very much tied to the land. No matter what they produce, it all depends on the soil health and the rain and the sun. And for the last 2 years, because of climate change, we've seen a complete shift of rainfall, which has completely devastated both the coffee harvest and the food harvest. So now, if you even put COVID aside and just look at the total production of coffee and other food products, In 2019, Burundi as a whole only produced 20% of their total coffee production on average. In 2020, because of the climate change and rainfall, we only produced 60% of the total production on average. So that means over a 2-year period, we were 120% lower production than we have been over the last 20 years. So now add on to that the layer of COVID, add on to that the New York coffee price is the lowest it's been, it's hovering around $1. And I just think that it's just a recipe for starvation. It's a recipe for death. It's a recipe for disaster. So we have to look at it both intrinsically from a holistic perspective of how can we affect the change that we need to do to affect climate change in a positive way, and what can we do today to make sure that the farmers we're working with are going to survive, that their kids will go to school, and that they can eat for this year. So those are the things that Long Miles are dealing with. Even though we're putting together protocols for COVID-19 about how to wear a face mask and wash your hands, we're also thinking about how can we make sure the kids go to school? How can we make sure that the grandkids have any land left that's not desert, and that climate change hasn't been destroyed? So we're talking multiple levels of stress upon a very small country of Burundi.
Wow, you're like a community manager, this kind of governor of the.
The reality is like we got into Long Miles. We did want to make a change, but we're also a coffee company. We realized that we will only survive as a family, as a company, if we can have coffee. So I don't want to put ourselves on a pedestal and say, look at us doing all this amazing stuff. We're just, part of what we're doing is survival. We know that we can't survive by ourselves if our neighbors aren't surviving. So our neighbors have to be thriving. And so I actually had a great conversation with World Coffee Research, and the guy that I was talking to was very dramatic, and he said there is not a single sustainable coffee in the world. And it got me thinking, and I realized it's true, because in Burundi, even if my own Long Miles farm is sustainable, but my neighbor's is not, they're going to chop down any trees they have, which is going to stop the rain, which is going to cause climate change, and soon my coffee farm will become finished. So it's not sustainable unless we produce an effective long-term fighting back against climate change. Like, that's just one thing. And then the other thing is making sure that our neighbors' kids can go to school, that they're not going to starve, that they're not going to get COVID. So, it's somewhat like community management, but the other part of it is just survival.
So did you see any support by the government, considering the hard hit in the past few years?
They have sent out trucks around the community with loudspeakers saying, wash your hands. So
it's a bad election campaign or something.
The interesting thing is that the government said that there was no COVID in Burundi up until about a month and a half ago. They said there's no COVID in Burundi, but then there was an election. The president stepped down, but in between when he stepped down and the new president was going to be sworn in, the past president actually died of COVID. So at that point, the government said, okay, there is COVID, but there's maybe like 4 cases in the country. So there's a sense of there's no testing, so no one understands how rampant it is, how bad it is. So it's kind of an ignorance. We don't know what to do, so good luck. And so that's where it comes down to us as a team to say we got to make sure that we take care of the people around us. And it's not the government's fault of Burundi because it's a very poor country. Even if they went out and said everybody needs to be tested, they don't have the testing facilities, they don't have the finances to do this. So I think as a country, Burundi's in a very hard place where if COVID really starts hitting it hard, it's not going to be a good scenario.
Considering with all the situations you've shared with us, we're like to talking about the positive things. It's on relationship coffee. So we all value the relationship coffee, but sometimes there is a kind of misconception of it because someone just seeing the relationship coffee is, wow, that's great. That's sometimes like a good marketing tool to, promote it to, the coffee lovers in the consuming countries. But we have to know that all realities now happening in, just as you explained, in Burundi. So how hard you think it's really implement that kind of relationship coffee structure to the real business or real coffee farming situation?
That's such a unique and great question. And I think because you are not a roaster, you'll ask that question. Yes. I think it's a hard question for roasters to talk about because roasters want to use that as a marketing tool. They want to say we have a relationship with this Kayonza washing station. But the reality is they have a relationship usually with an importer, or they've met the producer once, or if you as a roaster are having a bad year, you just won't buy coffee from that coffee producer again. Or if the coffee producer is having a bad rainfall and the quality drops from an 88 to an 87, you say, oh, no, we only take 88 plus coffees, so I'm not going to. That's not a relationship. That's like if you are married and you say, oh, my wife, today you're not looking so pretty, so you have to go. I'm sorry, you have to leave. But tomorrow you're looking good, you can come back. That's not a relationship. That's a bad relationship. And so I think what we've seen over the last 8 years, Long Miles has been a company and we've been producing coffee for 8 years, and we've seen some beautiful relationships, and we've seen some very not beautiful relationships that just serve us and the roaster nicely, but I wouldn't call it relationship coffee. And so really what it comes down to relationship is those partner roasters who for us year upon year keep buying coffee. If our quality goes down, we talk about it. Why is it less quality? What can we do to get it better? And they still buy the coffee from us. And then in the years where the coffee price skyrockets, we don't raise our price $2 a pound just because the global price goes up. So that's what a real relationship does, is how do we work together? And we've got some of those relationships around the world, from Australia to Europe to North America, that we've worked together. And it's been some beautiful partnerships. And there's some of these roasters who, have helped us with our Trees for Kibera program, which says, wow, we want to be partners way into the future. And Long Miles has a Trees for Kibera Foundation where we plant trees to extend the rainforest to help fight climate change. So we've had some roasters say, not only will we buy your coffee, but we're going to also invest into your coffee or your tree reforestation program. It's like when you start looking at ways to help each other beyond just a transactional relationship, that's what becomes relationship.
Wow. But how did you actually build it? Let's say it's Japanese listeners who are doing that, like as a roaster.
Yeah.
And how can they build that kind of relationship with farmers? There's a lot of barriers, including the language.
There's so many barriers. And I think like what we're doing now is one of those steps to overcoming this barrier. And like you have a unique advantage where you speak English. And I have a disadvantage where I don't speak Japanese. So it's finding ways like to say, like for both partners in a relationship, to say, what can we do to meet each other to create a way to form a relationship. And it shouldn't just be a coffee producer saying, I'm just producing good coffee and sending samples. It should be on my part saying, how can we welcome you from Japan? How can we facilitate a good relationship, welcome you and get you a visa, host you well? But then on the reverse side, it's a roaster in Japan saying, I know I can't just ask for samples and send an email and say that's a relationship. It's saying, when COVID's done, it's expensive, but I'm going to make the trip to come visit you in Burundi. Those people who have come to Burundi to visit us have become more than just coffee buyers. They're really friends for life. When you go to Burundi and you're eating goat on a stick and you're sleeping under the stars and it's raining and your 4x4 is about to fall off the side of a mountain, but you survive, and you drinking a warm beer at the end of a day, you're like, wow, we are more than just coffee buyers. This is something special. So I would say that, visiting and having that actual interpersonal connection has really helped create some of those long-term real relationship partnerships with roasters. And some of that has actually come through just meeting, not in Burundi, but meeting at specialty coffee events, or talking over Zoom or over email and saying, hey, we're both going to be in Europe for the barista competition. Let's meet and have dinner and talk about what would it be like to work together in the future. So I think it takes more than just asking for samples. It takes, hey, how can we connect? How can we find more about you? And that it goes both ways. So I hope that answers the question, because it's not just about coffee buying. It's about relationship building.
Yeah, totally makes sense. Thank you very much. So think towards the future, 2020, it's going to be a tough year expected with a lot of uncertainties. But how can you pivot that, for the Long Miles Coffee project?
Well, I think there's two amazing things. One is that this is probably our best quality coffee season ever. And I said this in the last episode, but we're finding that even though there's reduced volume and COVID impact is huge, we're seeing our quality. And I think maybe it's because of 2 years of low quantity of coffee, we've been able to really take care of our trees. And the result is amazing quality. So we're seeing all of our lots being 87, 88, 89 scoring coffees. And so we're excited to see what roasters do with this. And often when we cup at 88, that means it's going to be an 89, 90 coffee when the roaster gets it, because I'm not a roaster, and your listeners who are roasters are much better than I am at roasting. And so they make a beautiful thing out of this. So the first thing is that in 2020, I think Long Miles coffee it's the best we've had. So I'm excited, and it's kind of a relief amidst all of the drama to see something beautiful emerge. So that's one thing. And then the second thing is that even though it's a pandemic and there's a lot of uncertainty, in Long Miles, we're looking to the future, and we have two communities that have asked us to come and help them start producing coffee. So we're starting a washing station in Kenya this year. Wow. And so at the end of this year, you're going to see Long Miles Kenya. And actually, you're the first person to hear about this. So we just signed the agreement to start rehabilitating. It was a previous washing station on Mount Kenya, just outside of Nyeri, and we're going to refurbish it and bring our team in and start producing coffee in Kenya this year. And we also are just about to buy a side of a mountain in Uganda, on the western Uganda, on the Rwenzori Mountains. And we're going to start planting a farm in western Uganda on the border between the Congo and Uganda. So, and that's also, you're the first to know. So this is kind of a big reveal for us. We're looking to see if what we're doing in Burundi, if we can reproduce with the quality, the community impact, environmental impact, both in Kenya, on Mount Kenya, and in western Uganda.
Wow. We are really excited and really happy to hear about, your release, official
Yeah,
release to Japanese
yeah.
listeners. Great.
It's going to be very. And so when you were saying you hope to taste some Burundi coffee, I hope that by the end of 2020 you can taste some Burundi and some Kenyan, and then in early 2021 some Ugandan coffee, because there'd be nothing I would love more than to have really the Japanese community and your listeners and Japanese coffee culture understand that African coffee is not only unique, but it's one of the most floral, sweet, and just bright acidic coffees that you can ever imagine.
Nice. So in the last part, can you add some comments to the Japanese listeners? Because as it's the very first time for you to, speak up to the Japanese audiences. So if you add something.
Well, all I know is this. I spent a very short time coming to Japan to meet some coffee roasters a number of years back. And when I came back to Burundi from Japan, I told my wife that I won't go back unless I come with her, because this place is amazing. And I can't wait to introduce Christy to Japanese culture and the cuisine and the people. And I never felt just so warm and welcome and just so happy to be in a place like I did when I just was I was only in Tokyo. So I can imagine just the rest of Japan would just be even more so. So I would just say my message to Japan is I can't wait to come and meet you on a personal level, because that's really what Long Miles is about. Long Miles Coffee is not just about a coffee. It's about building relationships and creating long-term friendships. And we would like nothing more than to just create those bonds with just some families and individuals in Japan.
Amazing. Thank you very much again for taking the time. And please keep very much energetic and motivated for me and all of the Japanese listeners. Thank you very much.
It's great to be on here, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening. This is Coffee Radio. See you next week.